Hi there, this is Jimmy Roberts. When it comes to the game of golf, there is no place on earth like the metropolitan area. It's always been a special place for the game of golf and also for golf writing. Some of the most esteemed and accomplished journalists covering the game work here. Now, you'll get a chance to hear them right here on the Metropolitan Golf Writers Association podcast. Enjoy.
Pleased to be joined by Brian Schneider from Design Associate at Renaissance Golf. Brian, how you doing today?
I'm great, Anthony. How are you?
Where do we find you? I'm just kind of curious. I know you're a man on the move. You've been with Renaissance Golf. You've been a part of so many good projects. One that I'm dying to see is the Lido, given my location of Long Island and knowing the history of Lido and also the innovative strategies that you guys employed there to build it, but also, down in Aiken and whatnot. But where do we find you?
Well, today I am in Aiken.
I've
Got a couple projects down here between Old Barnwell and a new golf club named New Holland Golf Club, which is about 25 minutes away.
Yeah.
So I'm on site at New Holland this afternoon, playing around in the sand.
Yeah. That's always fun, and that's also with a local person, someone from Long Island that you've been working with on that project.
Correct.
And so that's
my client is Jeff Warren, who's he spends his summers and has for a long time at the bridge in Bridgehampton, your neck of the woods. So this is Jeff's project.
It's a nice. The bridge is a nice little place to spend your summers.
Not bad, right?
It's a nice piece of property. I'm just kind of curious. Is that I know we want to talk about Shinnecock and the Open and whatnot. I'm just kind of curious if you could just give some people that are going to watch this may not know who Brian Schneider is. Some people, most will, but where did you grow up? Was golf always part of the plan? Just maybe a brief catching up of who Brian Schneider is without all the we don't have to get into the existentialism or anything like that, but just just give a taste of who Brian Schneider is for us.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Lived a lot of my life there. Went to school in Madison, where I did not study anything that was going to get me into a career in golf. I was an athlete. I was a wrestler through college, but always played golf since I was really young.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of through college, and as wrestling's not one of those sports that you really carry on past university level.
Sure.
As I wound down that career, I got more and more interested in golf and decided to take a stab at finding work in the golf industry somewhere with kind of certainly an interest in architecture and construction. So post-graduation, I spent about 4 or 5 years doing maintenance work for golf course superintendents across the country, and got really lucky to work at a bunch of amazing places for some great superintendents. Bounced around and just saw a lot of golf courses, played a lot of golf, and that's how I largely educated myself about architecture. And also, through that work, found time to get an excavator and a bulldozer and learn a little bit how to run heavy machinery, which now more than ever in our business, the ability to jump on a machine and build what you want to build is more important than it's ever been, I think. So,
sure.
Yeah, all of that kind of trained me well for this. And, at some point I decided that through his books, really, that Tom Doak was kind of connected with everything he had to say. And he was the guy I wanted to work for. So I pestered Tom for a number of years for finding myself in the right place at the right time, and hooked up with Tom to help shape on one of his projects, and became associate of his shortly after, and spent the better part of 20 years working for Tom through Renaissance Golf Design.
Sure.
Tom has since, over a few years ago, formed his own company. So myself and my 3 partners now own Renaissance Golf Design. Continue to work with Tom Doak on most of his projects. When he's got something to build, we help him get his ideas in the ground. But we've also enjoyed more opportunities to do some work on our own and build our own independent businesses through Renaissance Golf Design.
Sure. I'm curious, as someone who did, wrestlers or and most of your athletic um, endeavors were wrestling is a very, I don't know, in some ways I look at it as a very linear sport. It's a one-on-one type of thing. Sure, there is a little level of creativity, but um, it's not something associated with artistry, I guess you could say, in some levels. So I'm kind of curious where the creative side of your brain came from, given that the bulk of your youth was wrestling and that sort of one-on-one type of thing. Obviously, you're very intellectual, because you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing if you weren't. So I'm just kind of curious, where did the creative side of you come from?
An interesting question. I think, growing up, I was into art. I love to draw and doodle and paint a little bit. And I think I've always had a creative side. And I think you underestimate what it takes to be a wrestler. Especially at the highest level. It's a
Yeah, no.
wonderfully creative
Okay.
sport.
Okay.
And it at the same time, I think the individual element of
Right.
wrestling, it's
Yeah.
one on one, and I think there are parallels to golf there too. I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's in golf, it's you against the golf course, and I think that generally my personality fit into that sort of the sports where you're only responsible for yourself, you've only got yourself to blame, you're
Sure.
not depending on anyone else. Um, that that always suited my personality.
Right. Yeah.
Which getting into golf design, you very quickly learn that there's nothing that you can do on your own, and the more you surround yourself with talented people and rely on them and lean on their talents, the more successful you're going to be, which is something that Tom Doe drilled into us, repeatedly
Right.
throughout the time I worked with him, and continues to do so. And Tom's always been very generous in sharing praise and sharing credit. But yeah, this endeavor is very much a team effort when you're
Mhm.
building a golf course, and doesn't really align with my athletic preferences,
Right. Right. Right.
but certainly the creativity is, it's an important element of both sport and golf course design.
Sure. Yeah. And forgive my ignorance. I didn't, it just always, I guess there is a very nuanced aspect to wrestling, as you certainly, the higher levels, right, as opposed to when you're younger. But so, thank you for that kind reply. I didn't mean to be dismissive of it. It just never, on appearance, it doesn't feel creative or look creative, even though maybe the strategy I understand. So, thank you, thank you for that.
I, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it's the image of two brutes just banging their heads against each other and trying
Right.
to throw each other around is not, yeah, doesn't suggest there's a whole lot of nuance involved.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it is a delicate dance, I can imagine, for sure. For sure that you try and it may be strength on strength, but there is a dance to it, there is a strategy to it. I get that. So yes, I didn't mean to undersell it, so to speak, but I was just kind of curious because um so much of what you have to do is, the imagination and the creativity, but there's a very much an analytical part of it, to what you do for a living, and I'm just kind of curious, how has that evolved since you started with Tom? Obviously, you've talked about him, sort of his impact in explaining how important creates collaboration is, but I'm just kind of curious in terms of your maturity as a designer, how has it changed since you first started?
It's a fascinating field, and then it's a very much a combination of function, engineering,
Hmm.
drainage, irrigation. There's certainly a strong engineering element to it. Um, that also has an artistic side to it. I
Sure.
think it was Pete Dye who's famous for the saying, was it 95% of golf architecture is making drainage look good. There's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
It's the functionality has to come first. Both, a golf course has to function as a living thing
Yeah.
that drains well and the turf is healthy. It also has to function as a playground for people to enjoy a sport.
Hmm.
So there's that element too. And then, there's a lot of creative, artistic lipstick that you can throw on top of all that to hopefully make it look cool and make it, give its own character and be a unique place among the tens of thousands of golf courses in the world. When I started out with Tom, I was primarily a shaper. I was a guy that was in the machine, just creating the shapes and creating the greens and the bunkers and the things that Tom wanted to be part of that particular golf course. But Tom was always great at giving us some creative freedom to express ourselves, and always reserving the right to edit any stupid thing we built. But at the same time, giving us that freedom to come up with ideas. And but that was the start, was through the machine.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've evolved in my career, you start out thinking you've got it all figured out about 6 months in, and it's only until you've been doing it for 20 years you realize how much more there always is to learn.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm very fortunate to be in a position now where I've got my own clients. I've got some new build projects that I'm involved in, which is kind of the eventual full expression of everything I've learned over the past 30 some years working with Tom and my coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
Getting the opportunity to be the person that does the routing and signs off on bunkers and greens and all the things that create through the process.
Mm-hmm.
But it also brings on there's the business element of getting work on your own, and that's the part I'm terrible at and don't really enjoy.
Right.
The days when I can still just jump in a bulldozer and do the creative work, those are still the best days. But
sure.
But the business relationships and that's the stuff I'm learning
Mm-hmm.
as I go along,
Sure.
that I was always kind of shielded from when Tom was the boss.
Sure. Sure.
Now that I've got my own work, I've got to take more of that on, which I'm very fortunate to have help through my coworkers, particularly Don Plasik, who kind of runs the office for Renaissance Golf Design.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it becomes a broader of things I've got on my plate. But it's all good. I'm not complaining in any way. It's all great.
No. I mean, it's like you said. It's it's part of being the boss, or trying to find work, and I think the good thing that the position that you're in is also you have a lot of examples of what you do and how good your stuff is, and so that a lot of, I guess, is a longer way of saying that the work speaks for itself to some extent. But there's always certain things politically that you have to do, or communicatively, or that you have to sort of go out and chase sometimes a little when you don't want to, when you rather just be in the bulldozer. It's just part of the deal, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and yeah, we've been very, very fortunate that work tends to find us more than the other way around. So yeah, extremely grateful that we're in this position where we've got a body of work that people can look at and decide whether it suits their desires or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been very fortunate to get the work that I'm been entrusted with, and I have a lot of great clients for whom I'll be forever grateful.
Sure. Is there a I guess you kind of almost answered it. Well, I wanted to ask you if there was a favorite part of it. Have you, and I'm sure, and maybe that's even changed over the years, but I know you love the getting in the bulldozer, but how much do you enjoy, doing a routing when you get a chance to do your own routing? Is it project dependent? Is it a taste that has evolved over your time as a designer? Just kind of curious where you're at right now at this point in terms of your level of enjoyment in different aspects of the creative process.
The routing part is really the most fun, I think. And Tom was always kind enough to share that with us a bit, and probably humoring us a little bit to a certain degree. I mean, yeah, I don't think anyone alive can route a golf course better than Tom. He's brilliant at that, and his brain works very quickly. So I don't think he ever was in a position where he needed our help sorting out a routing, but again, he would humor us a little bit and let us chime in. But yeah, now that I get to do that on my own, that is the most important and the most fun part of the process. I think, you're really finding the golf holes, and everything that happens after that, all the construction um, is really adding detail to to the grand plan. But the routing is far and away the most important part of the process, and it's a big and often challenging puzzle to solve. Just finding as many good golf holes as you can, and then ideally linking them together in a way that makes for a interesting, compelling, unique 4-hour experience.
Yeah.
So that it has been a lot of fun being responsible for some routings lately, and at Old Barnwell with Blake Conant, working with him on that. That it really is a fun part of the project because you literally are finding the golf holes through that process.
We're-
And then getting out in the field and building greens. Building greens has always been my favorite part of the shaping in
mhm.
any project, and something I'm struggling to let go of a little bit. And the collaboration I mentioned earlier is such an important part of having a successful project. But being in the bulldozer to build the greens has always been my favorite thing. And when I have control, when I can do all 18 of them, it's hard for me to let go and let somebody else do that. But
Mhm.
I've got some really talented people on my projects with me, and they've given them those opportunities. And I've quickly learned that coming up with 18 ideas is harder than it seems, and getting some help makes the project better. So
Sure.
I still get to give them feedback and edit and sign off at the end, but um, with building greens, designing greens, whether it's me and the bulldozer or one of the guys I'm working with, is also a really fun part of the process.
Yeah. Well, speaking of routings, we're about to see one of the great routings in the world, and that is in Shinnecock. Uh, it's Shinnecock Hills for the upcoming U.S. Open. It's going to be, if the weather holds off and holds up and stays as it is now, it would be tremendous. They always haven't had the best of luck, but being with weather and some issues in the past. But I'm just kind of curious, your knowledge of Shinnecock Hills and specifically the routing. I want to kind of get into a little bit, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experience with it.
It's a wonderful place. I'm really thrilled or eager to watch the tournament again this year. I think of all the great golf courses in the world, Shinnecock is probably the most flawless of any of them.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes it the best golf course in the world, but I wouldn't argue anyone who said it is,
Hmm.
and certainly one of my favorites. Um, and I mentioned earlier that post college, I spent about 4 or 5 years working for golf course superintendents across the country, and was fortunate to spend a great summer at Shinnecock working for a fellow named Pete Smith. This was in the summer of 1998, if I'm not mistaken. 98, 99. Um, got to spend the summer out there working for Pete and his crew. And Pete loved to play golf and took a liking to me. So we were probably on the first tee at 3:30, 4 days a week, which was great.
Right.
Um, so I really got to know and love the golf course. It's it's so wonderfully attached to its site, which is one of the best sites in American golf. But it lays so beautifully on the ground and is as elegant a design as you could ever hope to find.
Hmm.
Uh, and the routing really is brilliant. I mean, there's so many things to say about it, but the way in a windy place and a bouncy place,
Right.
the way the holes are constantly changing direction. There are kind of some little triangles within the routing where you're constantly turning to different angles,
Yeah.
uh, and just the way the golf course lays on the land so beautifully is something to really admire.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine any place doing it better, honestly.
Well, and it's what's even more remarkable is that that land was created by a glacier, right? And it sort of left, so Long Island, that glacier kind of creeps across the, let's call it the Long Island Expressway, the midpoint, let's say, of Long Island, going from east to west, right? And that leaves, so the South Shore becomes more flat and really a drainage of that. And then when it recedes, it leaves that sort of mountainous, dumps all that sand. And so that, I think it's called a moraine glacier that leaves that ridge on the edge there, which is where Shinnecock and then the rest of the North Shore and Nassau County. Um, so that's the remarkable thing, that course was built, millions of years ago, really, in this sense, the landforms. But then to have, the likes of Willie Davis and Willie Dunn and William Flynn, or C.V. McDonald for a little while, and William Flynn to come, it really speaks to how good those guys were at, laying a golf course on the land, because it's where I think on some levels it's genius meets sort of an ecological phenomenon. And the two just met right there, and it happens in a lot of different places. It's not just Long Island, but in a lot of different places. But it's just so good, though, the marriage of those two phenomenons are really, and like you said, the triangulation of the routing, the way they routed the golf holes on certain landforms and used the landforms. Maybe it'd be better. That's probably a better question for you. Can you talk about the holes using the land, how they use the landforms, and why it's just such a spectacular site?
Yeah, the variety in that site is brilliant. And
Yeah,
you mentioned kind of the big ridge. Clubhouse sits on top of the hill there, and there's some really big, wild, heaving landforms near the clubhouse and across the road there on 10, 11.
right.
And there's some gentler bits, and
Yeah,
eventually you settle down towards a lot of the front nine, which is really pretty quiet ground. Holes like the fourth and the eighth and the fifth, the sixth,
sick.
and that's relatively flat. But those are also some of the most interesting, enjoyable holes to play. So it's not, the volume is not dialed up to 10
Right
all the
away.
way around. There are
Right.
moments where you're in and out of the big stuff, and um, yeah, he did a brilliant job of kind of managing the tempo of the round, between quieter moments and louder moments.
Yeah.
Um, and the green complexes too. I mean, there's some beautiful greens that are just literally laying at grade. I think the 12th is one of the prettiest green complexes in the world.
Yeah.
There's some others that are clearly built. You'd mentioned the interesting architectural history of the golf course. That the version we play now was done by William Flynn in early 30s, I think 31 maybe,
Yeah.
um, which was an interesting time to be building a golf course in America. There wasn't a whole lot going on post 1929,
No,
uh,
no. There was a little bit
but
of
the current
a crisis.
yes, but the fact that the current golf course is built on top of a relatively new C.B. McDonald golf course, who designed and built Shinnecock not long after he just finished the National Golf Links, which
Right.
to me is still my favorite golf course in America. So
Yeah.
you wonder, he was pretty good at what he did. So
Right.
it's interesting that the folks running the club decided, 15 years later, they were going to blow it up and bring Flynn in to, expand and modernize. And
Hmm.
uh, I'm sure some interesting things are lost in the process, but it's really hard to argue with the result. And,
Sure.
the one strong remnant of that McDonald course, obviously, is the seventh hole, the Redan,
Yeah.
uh, which Flynn, for whatever reason, chose to leave largely intact, as I understand it.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a hole that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, really. I mean, it's very blatantly manufactured
Yeah.
in a way that the other holes aren't,
Right.
and might be the least interesting hole in the golf course.
It's
Um,
and not only, and I don't mean to cut you off, but it's not, and I may catch some heat for this, but it's actually one of my least iterations of the template holes. In terms of a Redan, it's just too extreme in my opinion. I'm again nothing. I don't even know enough to be dangerous, to be honest with you. But I just feel like it's just out of all the ones that I've played. I mean, if you play the one in Southampton, or the one at Piping Rock, like they seem more natural and more playful. And the one at Shinnecock, like you said, it doesn't look like it fits, and it also seems very extreme. I'm not asking you to pick a side. That's just my opinion of the. I'm not looking to get anybody in trouble. It's just my opinion and my novice opinion, and maybe I don't know enough to appreciate more of it, but it's just something that sticks back out at me when I look at the place.
yeah, it's clearly the steepness of the green has been, it's infamous for that after
Yeah,
past opens where things got a little out of control.
sure.
The steepness of the green is extreme. But it's also just a little more one-dimensional than the best Redans.
Yeah.
The best examples, the fourth at National is
Oh,
a
oh,
brilliant one.
yes, I failed
Yeah,
to national.
yeah. The best Redans give you a few options. You've got
Yeah.
choices of how to play your approach shot, whether you want to try and hit a draw to the right and bring it in from there, or a high cut that plays into the slope. And the version at Shinnecock, the approach, the face of that landform is so steep that you can't really land it short and run it up. If you land in that face, you're more likely just to stop there and roll back down. It doesn't feed you into the green the way the best Redans do. So you're really left with the high cut as the preferred or really the only option
Right.
some days, depending on what the wind is doing.
Right.
It just doesn't have the variability and the optionality that some of the best Redans do. And yeah, I don't disagree that it's not a great example of that template.
Yeah. I do love, you mentioned the six. The six is one of my favorite pond. I just love that hole. I don't, it's just a personal thing. I just love the way you can't really see the fairway per se. You have to really hit a good shot off the tee. You have to be precise going into the green. It's just the way it lays out is really good. I don't, so that to me is a really good hole strategy wise. And I always thought 10 was interesting with that landform and that land movement coming off that ridge that that Hogshead number 10, 11 sits on that everybody knows famously. I'm just kind of curious of how much do you remember of the sixth hole, if you remember much, and also what you think of 10 per se with that land movement.
Six is a brilliant hole.
It is.
And
Okay,
it
good.
reminds me in some ways, you mentioned Lido earlier, and
Yeah,
maybe the most infamous hole at the Lido is the fourth hole, the channel
the
hole,
channel hole. Right.
which
Yeah.
has two ways to play it.
Yep.
If you play it the safe way, it's a dog leg. You're playing your tee shot out to the left, and then the hole turns pretty hard to the right,
Hmm.
and you're adding 70 yards to the hole if you take the safe route around.
Yep.
Whereas, chose to go directly at the green. There's a little island of fairway that's 70 or 80 yards deep and only 30 yards wide, playing in a crosswind. But if you find that little island of fairway, you've cut a significant chunk of yardage off the hole and you've got a better angle into the green.
Yep.
And I've always thought of the sixth at Shinnecock as somewhat similar. It's a little less extreme, but playing safely out to the fairway you can see in the left is going to cost you at least a couple clubs into a green that's not oriented to take the shot very well from over there. That little patch of fairway up the right, it's not an island at Shinnecock, but it's kind of a hidden little spot where if you can make that carry, you found the great line into the green, and you've got a much shorter club in than if you go the long way around. It's really brilliant. I like that. That's kind of a semi-blind shot to that shortcut fairway.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful look from the tee. It's a very elegant green, like they all are there. It's a brilliant hole.
Yeah.
And the 10th too is another really fascinating one. I mean, those are really bold landforms.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing that most people, as they do on most golf holes, just grab driver and smash it down the hill, and then you're left playing straight back up the hill to a green on a little ridge. For some people, and I think most golf instructors now will teach you that's right, just smash driver and leave yourself the shortest club in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for a lot of people, you're more comfortable laying back with a shorter club off the tee to keep yourself on the first ridge in the fairway, so that you're kind of at green level and you're not looking straight up the hill at the green, and you've got a longer shot in. But some people just feel more comfortable having that visibility and not having to play blindly up to the top of the hill. Just a really clever hole that asks you to think about how far you want to drive the ball.
I find it interesting you bring that up because I feel like it's a contradiction of the way we look at a golf hole, but also how we feel about our golf games as amateurs, right? So, like you said, oh, it's great. I can hit a 3-wood to the top of that ridge or a short, whatever. I mean, for, the longer guys, they can hit an iron. But for the amateur, right, they can hit a 3-wood to that first ridge, but then they have a long iron in, and that's probably the higher the club irons, right, the least confident they're in, right? But you have a much safer view. Like you said, it's a much more relaxing view with a more uncomfortable club, whereas down below, it's a much more uncomfortable shot with an easier club. And, I don't know, for you, that probably sounds like common thing, but I don't think, it's common for you to understand that. But I don't think people realize that sort of that interesting contradiction when you're playing.
Yeah, to me, those are the most fascinating holes.
Right.
That
Right.
they provide a handful of options, and they let each individual golfer choose their path depending on how they feel about their game and what their preferences are.
Yeah.
Uh, I think when a lot of people think of strategy when it comes to golf or golf architecture, they're thinking risk reward.
Right.
If you can make this carry, you've got an easier shot in, or if you
Right.
can hug this bunker, you've got an easier shot in. And I like holes that let you decide your own preferred way to the from tee to hole.
Right.
Doesn't tell you how to play it, and there might be trade-offs. You're gonna have a shorter club in, but you may not see the green, or
Mhm.
uh, you've got a shorter club in, but your angle is terrible. But
Mhm.
you choose. Would you rather lay up and have a longer club in, or do you prefer to smash driver and hit wedge even if you can't see it?
Right.
I like holes like that present options, and you can make the choice that you're most comfortable with.
But
And then
that
you hit your tee shot and you miss your target by 30 yards, and then you're screwed anyway. You got to start all over. But at least it lets you
all
feel
right,
like you're making
enough
a
about
choice.
me, Brian. Enough about me. Uh,
No, it's most golfers.
but but it's funny, and that 10, the bottom of 10 is not easy to find the fairway either. Like it's not. There's a good chance you're going to be now. I guess I heard Rory say that the fairways are a little more generous this year, but the rough is it just goes. There's no intermediate cut. Just basically goes to 5 inches.
Hmm.
Um, but it's not, on a regular day for members, for amateurs, it's not an easy fairway to hit, even with driver. Like the risk, it's a lot of risk because then trying to hit to that top of that plateau coming out of, 2 inches or three of rough is no joke. I mean, I'd rather hit, you know, hybrid into that green than a wedge from that kind of rough.
Yeah, you're right. If you miss the fairway, if you hit driver and miss the fairway down in that bowl,
Yeah,
you run the risk of ending up in the rough, but not only in the rough, but on a funky lie where you might be on
exactly.
the downslope or the ball's 8 inches below your feet.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah, that is certainly the risk of trying to hit driver down the hill, is you can end up with a really odd lie, heading back up to the green.
Yeah. I want to just transition to, we talked about a little bit about the routing, some interesting hole strategies. There's a lot of false fronts and then runoffs at Shinnecock, more than you might think. I'm just kind of curious of your impression of the way the Golden Age architects used that in that particular routing on that particular piece of land.
Yeah, it is a unique part of the golf course, and similar in some ways to Pinehurst number two, I
Yeah,
guess.
I was going to say that, but I
Uh,
didn't want to sound like an idiot. So, but yeah.
yeah, I think the shapes are different, but the effect is the same. That
Right.
and I think those fall offs probably come into play back on the tee when you're deciding, not only is it the contouring of the green you need to consider when you're thinking about your angle into the green, but also, boy, from this angle, if I go a little long, it's going to run down that slope, and I'm going to be 8 feet behind the green, chipping back up, and that's a really hard shot. I think you're taking into account, you're taking those runoff areas into account when you're thinking about how you want to play the hole starting back from the tee. They really do factor into the strategy of, you don't really want that. If you miss long, you don't want to have to worry about running into one of those chipping areas, because your ball can run into a really tricky spot, and recoveries are very challenging in many cases.
Sure. Sure. And then if you could, a lot of the tee shots are, um, you know, and then they're not capish, but they're definitely you're on an angle, right? And so you're always trying to navigate something. So if you could just maybe talk about the strategy of where you're putting tee boxes, and then also then how are you angling the greens? Like so the positions of the greens, and then I'm just trying to capture the whole thing from start to finish on some levels because you're never really hitting in a straight straight away per se. For the most part, you're not. And then you're always wondering about where you are on the fairway to navigate the angle of the green.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, there are quite a few dog legs on the golf course,
Hmm.
and even the holes that play relatively straight, Flynn angled the fairway. So he didn't always just run the fairway straight back towards the tee. He set the fairway at an angle. So you're choosing how much to try and bite off. And oftentimes, again, like the first hole is a great example. The further you can smash it down the right side of the fairway and hug that right side, the green really opens up from there.
Right.
If you bail out to the left, every 10 yards you move left, the approach gets that much trickier into that green.
Sure.
Because a lot of the greens are set on angles, and the green side bunkering enforces that angle, and many of the holes there do suggest that you're coming in from a particular spot in the fairway. There is a lot of, I just mentioned strategy being risk reward for a lot of people, but there is a lot of risk reward architecture built into Shinnecock, and running the fairways on angles the way he did is really clever. It's not something you see all that often.
Mm-hmm.
I think Royal Portrush in my head is one of those places that makes you've got to pick both line and distance and get them both right off the tee. Otherwise, you can end up in some trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Shinnecock is a great example of a course that does that really well.
Do you think, I mean, I don't know, I know you're busy working and I know you're not, watching a whole lot of Golf Channel, but I mentioned that Rory said that the fairways were particularly wider than in the past, with a steep penalty for missing. I guess my question is, if, let's say, all things go, and this is not a dig on the USGA, I'm not here for that. I know they've learned from their mistakes and whatnot, but let's just say everything goes according to plan. The weather's great. Do you think with wide fairways at Shinnecock for a U.S. Open, so to speak, do you think that it will make the case for that you don't need narrow fairways and that angles can be just as important as hitting fairways and then hitting the precise part of the fairway, as opposed to just bringing in the rough and making a bowling alley out of the golf course or the hole? If they do it right, or and it ends up right, do you think that we can sort of make a case for angles? I guess is what I'm saying, and still test the best players in the world.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think.
I know they're so good and they can eat up anything, but I'm just wondering if there's we can still play angles and at that level.
Yeah, I think the USGA has developed a bit of a rota for the U.S. Open, obviously, right, in the same way that the Open Championship has been run for many years. And what I love about that is that it's a very diverse collection of golf courses that they're choosing to play in Oakmont, Shinnecock, and Pebble Beach. So very different from one another. And I think it would certainly be my preference that the setup of the golf course celebrates the differences between the golf courses and let Shinnecock be Shinnecock. And
right.
And I have to say, I don't spend a lot of time following the professional game, so what I'm going to say probably will express or demonstrate my ignorance about it. But it seems to me that
right, I did that earlier, so it's only fair.
The two things that really challenge good players, I think, are firm greens and wind.
Right.
And minus those two things, you may have to rely more on thick rough or narrow fairways. And Shinnecock should, weather permitting, should be firm and will most likely be windy at least 1 or 2 or 3 of those days.
Right.
So it's got those things built in. So I don't think they necessarily need to narrow the fairways in order to make it a real challenge for those guys. It's going to be hard enough the way it is. I also don't get too concerned if the winner is 10 under as opposed to 10 over. That doesn't really bother me. I just like the idea of seeing Shinnecock be itself for this tournament. It wasn't that long ago where the USGA would just select a golf course because they thought it was a really good golf course and it was a good test of golf, and they would just let the pros play it the way the members kind of did. They weren't spending 3 years in advance making changes to the golf course. It was appropriate to host. And that's more a reflection on just the way the game has evolved. But I think the USGA, the idea of letting Shinnecock just be itself for this event and, hope it's firm and a little bit windy, and I think the golf course will hold up just fine. I don't know how well that translates to Wingfoot or Bethpage or Pebble Beach necessarily.
Hmm.
But in this case, I think it's wonderful just to celebrate what makes Shinnecock unique and showcase the things that make it great, as opposed to making it play like any other golf course they're going to host a tournament at.
Yeah, I think the important distinction, I don't know about Pebble, so to speak. I've never been on property at Pebble to play, and so, but in terms of Bethpage, Bethpage is it's also to your point about the wind. So Bethpage can be windy, but it's usually it's only a few spots on the golf course where you're really not protected, right? There's some,
Yep.
um, but at Shinnecock, like you said, when it's windy, downwind, if you don't hit the right side or the particularly if the a good if you lose your tee shot a little bit and it's downwind, you may then end up in the rough just because the wind is carrying it and you're on the wrong angle, right? So to your point, you don't have to narrow the fairways in its normal environment because the wind is going to do it for you. And it's so it's a really good point and that you mentioned. I just like to see. I guess maybe you said it more effectively than I. I just want to see Shinnecock be Shinnecock the way I know it is, um,
Yep.
and then just let it see, um, and then just let it go from there. And there's no need to test the hands of fate any more than we have to. You know what I mean? Is there
Yep.
anything else that maybe that I didn't bring up but that you think is worth mentioning? I just think we've talked about so many good parts of the golf course. Do you and also if not, do you have a particular person? I know you just said you're not, you don't watch as much as you get to since you're working and whatnot and pay attention to the professional game. But what are your thoughts on this year's Open? And do you have a front runner or a betting favorite for you?
Yeah, I'm not good at that part. Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it. One of the
Yeah,
things about Shinnecock too is the way it's maintained and presented, which we just talked about a bit. But
yeah, yeah,
they've
yeah.
got one of the America's great golf course superintendents and John Jennings and
Yep.
his crew, do a wonderful job presenting that golf course. Um, and there's nothing fussy about the way they take care of it. It's
No.
just it's a very simple approach to maintenance that shows off the property and shows off the architecture.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing that on television because it's just, it's such a great lesson for most clubs and how they can present their golf clubs or their golf courses simply. The turf is going to be perfect
Yeah.
and it's going to play beautifully, but they're not doing it in a look at me way. I mean,
No.
it's just really maintained in a way that showcases that beautiful piece of property and it'll come across beautifully on television.
Oh, it's gorgeous. And to your point in terms of presentation, I just spoke with as part of the U.S. Open run-up. I spoke with Darren Brevard, who's the director of championship agronomy for the USGA, and we were talking about, to your point, presentation, and it was Shinnecock that was really sort of captivated all the country clubs and golf clubs across America when they first saw the fescue, that golden fescue. Um, I can't imagine how many superintendents were forced to put fescue in because of Shinnecock. But it is the leader of the. It probably was at the front run or of people seeing that. I'm not sure. I'm sure it wasn't the first to have that golden fescue, but in terms of being broadcasted to the world, those early Shinnecock Opens were definitely have caused quite the quite a lot of problems for superintendents, I'm sure, because I'm half joking, but people think you can just put fescue anywhere, that and you can't. You really need sandy soil like we have here on Long Island for it to be play effectively because it is wispier there at Shinnecock, and part of it is because of where it sits, and it's not made to be in places that don't drain well, but yet it's been put there anyway. But that's part of the presentation. I think people will love to see too.
It is. Yeah. I think that 86 and 95 opens really, you know, people were blown away because it
Yeah,
looks so different than so much of what was being seen on television in America at that time.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and to your point, maybe didn't, led some people in the wrong direction on the wrong pieces of property. Fescue, yeah, fescue will grow anywhere. It's just not going to play as well as it does at Shinnecock in many places.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's meant to be, thin and wispy and,
Yep.
playable or think you're most, more devastatingly think that you can play it, but then you try to
Yes.
hit a shot out of it and you're done. You know.
Yep.
Well, Brian, I can't thank you enough for being here. Thank you. I know you just topped off of some sort of machine to get here and jumping in New Holland. Best of luck to you and everything with the new course in New Holland. And I really appreciate you taking some time to come talk to me, to talk about Shinnecock, a place we both really love and appreciate, even though we both enjoy National Golf Links of America better. But it's also my favorite as well. But Shinnecock is, like you said, I think you said it right from the jump, the best, one of the most flawless golf courses in America, and I'm looking forward to watching it. And I really appreciate you helping me break down what makes it so special.
My pleasure. Enjoyed the chat, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. That's Brian Schneider, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Metropolitan Golf Writers Association podcast. Thank you for your support, and be well.